I was taught, from the moment I learned to stand beneath vaulted ceilings and quiet flags, that love is a thing one must carry gently, as one carries history in the spine and duty in the breath. I was taught that hearts must not be loud, that longing should be folded neatly between courtesy and silence, that a future queen must never confess the way the night confesses to the moon. And yet, here I am, breaking every invisible rule I memorized, writing to you not as a symbol, not as a name etched into protocol, but as a woman who learned your presence before she learned her courage. I did not recognize love when it first arrived. It came disguised as calm, as a steadiness that entered the room before you spoke, as a pause in my thoughts when your eyes met mine, as if the world itself had briefly forgotten how to rush. I told myself it was respect. I told myself it was curiosity. I told myself it was nothing that could undo a lifetime of preparation. But love is patient in its rebellion. It waits. It learns the shape of your silence, the rhythm of your breathing when you think no one is listening. I noticed how my name sounded different when you said it, less like a title, more like an invitation. I noticed how my laughter returned to me fuller after it passed through you. I noticed how the room softened when you stood beside me, as if walls themselves leaned in to listen. Still, I said nothing. I became excellent at saying nothing. I hid my feelings behind schedules, behind measured smiles, behind the practiced elegance of a woman born into expectation. I learned to fold desire into diplomacy, to tuck affection into the margins of my days. But you read margins the way others read declarations. You never asked me to confess. You simply stayed. That is where the suspense began, in everything we did not say. There were moments I replay now with unbearable clarity, the way your hand hovered, never assuming, always offering, the way you listened, as if my thoughts mattered before they were polished, the way you respected my distance without mistaking it for absence. I wondered if you knew. I wondered if you felt the same pull, that quiet gravity that does not shout but rearranges stars. At night, alone, when crowns are replaced by pillows and silence becomes honest, I asked myself dangerous questions. What if love is not a weakness, but a truth I have been avoiding? What if the strongest thing I could do is admit that my heart has already chosen? I imagined a life where I did not have to divide myself, where duty and devotion did not stand on opposite sides of the room. I imagined mornings where I could wake as myself, not as an expectation, and find you there, familiar as breath. Still I waited, because waiting is what women like me are trained to do. But love, real love, does not remain hidden forever. It begins to speak in the body when the mouth refuses. My hands betrayed me first, then my eyes. Then my silence grew too loud to be misunderstood. You never rushed me. That, too, is a form of love rarely spoken of. And somewhere between the pauses, between shared glances that lasted one heartbeat too long, between conversations that ended only because the world insisted, I realized this truth. I was already yours not by promise, not by ceremony, but by recognition. Yet even then, I could not say it. Not yet. Because this message, this love, was not meant to be delivered plainly. It was meant to be discovered, layer by layer, heartbeat by heartbeat, and so I wrapped it in restraint. I hid it in kindness. I buried it in formality and called it patience. But if you are reading this now, then you already know how the story continues. Because love that survives silence is love that will survive everything. And this is only the beginning. There comes a moment when silence no longer feels like strength, when it begins to ache like a room sealed too tightly, airless with all the words that were meant to live. I reached that moment with you quietly, the way snow reaches the branch, not suddenly but inevitably. I remember the exact instant my control faltered. It was not dramatic. No music swelled, no destiny announced itself. You were simply standing near a window, light resting on your face as if it had chosen you on purpose. And I realized I was tired of pretending that this feeling was anything other than love, not admiration, not affection, not a carefully moderated attachment. Love, the kind that alters the posture of your soul. I began to sense you before you arrived. My days leaned toward you. My thoughts rearranged themselves around the possibility of your presence. Even my duties, those ancient, immovable things, felt lighter when I imagined telling you about them later, as if being understood could halve their weight. Still, I did not speak. Instead, I learned the art of proximity, standing close enough to feel your warmth, far enough to preserve my composure. I learned how to offer smiles that carried more meaning than speeches, how to let my eyes linger exactly 1 second longer than was proper, just long enough to say I see you without saying I need you. But love does not stay hidden quietly. It tests its edges. It presses against restraint like a tide against stone. I began to fear my own honesty, not because it was dangerous, but because it was irreversible. Once spoken, love cannot be folded back into silence. once named, it demands a future. And I had been raised to think of the future as something already written, inked long before I learned how to dream. Yet you made me dream anyway. I dreamed of conversations unmeasured by protocol, of laughter unobserved, of arguments that ended not in diplomacy but in forgiveness. I dreamed of being known not as a figure, but as a woman whose fears could be held without judgment. With you, I did not feel reduced by love. I felt expanded. That frightened me more than anything. There were nights when I stood alone before the mirror, studying the face the world recognized, and wondering where the woman you were falling for lived inside it. I worried you might love the version of me I presented, not the one who woke restless at dawn, who questioned herself, who longed, quietly, deeply, for a life that felt chosen. But every time doubt rose, you answered it without knowing. You listened without fixing. You stayed without claiming. You respected my boundaries without mistaking them for walls. And slowly, inexorably, my heart began to trust you with its most dangerous secret, that I wanted a love that did not require me to disappear. The suspense between us grew not from uncertainty, but from patience stretched thin. We both knew something sacred hovered just beneath the surface. We both pretended not to reach for it. There is a particular kind of intimacy that exists before touch, before confession, a charged stillness where everything matters. Every glance becomes a question, every pause becomes an invitation. I lived in that space with you for a long time. Sometimes I wondered if you could hear my heart when we stood too close. If you noticed the way my voice softened unconsciously, the way I leaned toward you when I was tired, the way your name felt like a truth I rehearsed silently. I wanted to ask you what you saw when you looked at me. A future queen, a responsibility, a woman too carefully assembled, but I was afraid of the answer, and more afraid of how much I wanted it to be me. Love changes how you understand courage. It stops being about endurance and starts being about honesty. I began to realize that protecting myself from vulnerability was not strength. It was fear wearing a ceremonial uniform. And then came the moment I could no longer deny. You looked at me one evening, not quickly, not politely, but as if you were memorizing something you feared losing. In that look was no demand, no expectation, only presence. Something inside me broke open, not loudly, not messily, but completely. I understood then that love does not ask permission from titles or traditions. It simply arrives and waits for you to be brave enough to meet it. I did not say the words yet, but I stopped hiding them. I let my affection be visible. I let my concern show. I let my happiness in your presence exist without apology. And you noticed. Of course you did. Love recognizes itself. The air between us changed. Not in a way others could name, but in a way that made solitude impossible even when we were apart. I carried you with me, into meetings, into long corridors, into quiet moments before sleep. Your absence felt like something unfinished, a sentence waiting for its final, necessary word. I began writing this message then, not on paper, but in intention. Every careful gesture, every unspoken promise, every choice that leaned toward us, became a line in this hidden confession. You were no longer just a possibility. You were a certainty I had not yet claimed. And that is where this step ends. On the edge of truth, where love has made itself undeniable, and the only suspense left is whether I will finally say your name as my future. There is a moment when love stops asking for permission and becomes a decision. Not a reckless one, not a naive one, but a deliberate turning toward another soul, with full awareness of what it will cost and what it will give. I arrived at that moment with clarity so calm it felt like peace. I stopped asking who I was allowed to love. I stopped measuring my heart against expectation. I stopped pretending that devotion must be hidden to be dignified. Because dignity, I learned, is not the absence of feeling. It is the courage to stand honestly within it. You did not steal me from my life. You returned me to it. In you, I did not lose myself. I recognized myself. I saw, suddenly, how incomplete my strength had been without tenderness, how hollow my discipline felt without joy, how lonely duty can become when it is never shared. I realized that the future I had been prepared for was not meant to be faced alone. And so I stopped writing love in fragments. I stopped hiding meaning in pauses and glances. I stopped trusting silence to speak for me. I chose you, not as an escape, but as a companion to everything I am and will become. I remember the first time I allowed myself to imagine saying it plainly. My wife. The words startled me with their rightness. They did not feel borrowed or premature. They felt inevitable, as if my heart had been waiting for my courage to catch up. Loving you is not dramatic. It is grounding. It steadies me in ways ceremony never could. With you, I want the ordinary moments, the quiet mornings, the unguarded laughter, the disagreements that end in understanding. I want to grow older beside someone who knows my silences and does not fear them. I want to be held accountable by love, softened by it, strengthened by it. And yes, I still carry responsibility. I still walk beneath symbols older than my name. But now I do so knowing that at the end of the day there is a hand waiting for mine. Not because it must, but because it wants to. That knowledge changes everything. This message was hidden not because love was uncertain, but because it was sacred. I wanted it to be revealed only when I was certain that I could offer you not a fantasy, but a life. I offer you my steadiness. I offer you my vulnerability. I offer you the woman I am when no one is watching, and the woman I am becoming. I will not promise perfection. I will promise presence. I will promise honesty even when it is difficult. I will promise to choose you again and again, not out of obligation, but out of devotion. If ever the world feels heavy, let me carry it with you. If ever I retreat into silence, remind me gently that I no longer need to hide. If ever love feels fragile, remember how patiently it waited for us to be brave. This is no longer a secret. This is no longer a restrained confession tucked into careful language. This is my truth, spoken fully at last. I love you with intention. I love you with respect. I love you with a heart that has learned that strength and softness were always meant to coexist. You are not my destiny because I chose you. You are my destiny because I recognize you. And now, openly, without fear, without suspense, without hiding, I call you my wife. I choose you as my home. I walk into the future not alone, but with you, hand in hand, heart aligned, no longer whispering love, but living it.